I met Isabel just maybe less than a month ago. I just was doing something else and someone called me to a meeting, say, you need to listen to that girl. And I was so busy, I had so many other things to do, but I sat nevertheless. And I really got hooked from the minute I joined the meeting. So I was extremely impressed by everything about her, from her presence to the depths of her knowledge, her philosophy, her mindset, her attitude. She's gold, this girl. So I'm very, very excited that we got to connect deeper and exchange our views. And after that, I decided, all right, we need to help you get the word out. And let's start with my community, record it, and give you the space for you to share what you're all about. As she will explain to you, there is a reason you must attend and you must listen. It's you're 98% water. So we're not really talking about water here today. We're talking about you, talking about me, where that's really what it is interesting and why you need to listen, because you might get maybe some interesting point about water, but you might have more important clues about what's going on in my body, what's going on in my life, and how I can probably shift certain things accordingly. So, well, whenever she will say water, she's really what she's doing is she's talking about you guys. So she's going to be there for a while. I hope we'll have plenty of time for questions. Otherwise, please, by all means, as you have the questions, put them in the chat so that, and if you either put them for everyone, otherwise send them to me privately so I can actually have a bit of monitoring. I will also share in the right side a link to a questionnaire. I'd like you to spend a few minutes, you will need to copy paste and keep it. And at the end of the webinar, please take a few minutes to give a little feedback for Isabel. And also, you know, this way you can get information about her. So this is what I want to say. The reason I'm interested in this topic is a few years ago, I started, for most of you who know me, a little app called Refill My Bottle. So somehow I really got fascinated about everything related to water and understanding why there's always transformation is always happening in water. All the religion talk about water. So it really got me to really reflect about the power of water in our lives. And I just touched it. So having a master like Isabel come and really educate us all very deeply is an amazing opportunity. So without further ado, Isabel, I'll let you take over. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that warm welcome, that amazing introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to come and share with this community. It really is an honor. Thank you guys all for showing up. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to get to share my passion with you guys, and I hope you'll get a lot out of it. It's really potentially life-changing information. So go ahead and grab a glass of water if you don't have one with you already, because I promise this is going to make you thirsty. Also grab a pen and a paper because this is nice. I see everyone with their glasses of water. That makes me so happy. Also grab a pen and a paper because it's definitely going to be very information dense. But don't worry about grokking and remembering it all right away, because everyone who fills out the little survey that Alex is going to send in the chat will also get a replay of the video. So we're going to dive pretty deep on a lot of topics about water. And without further ado, let's dive in. All right, can everybody see? Oh, I can't see my mouse, hang on. Does anyone see my mouse? It's missing. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see the presentation?
Yep, all good, darling.
Okay,
good to go.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, my name is Isabel, and I've been studying water for 10 years and teaching about her for 6 years now in 6 different countries and counting. And today we're basically just going to swim through an overview of some of the basics that I really feel like everyone should know about water. As Alex said, we're all familiar with the fact that we're 70% water by volume, but molecularly, we're actually 99.92% water molecules. So all of this applies directly to your body and who you are as a human being. So we're going to touch briefly on a lot of different aspects of water, from the scientific to the spiritual, from the mundane to the mystical. And if any aspect really captivates your attention, then you can learn more about it in the free videos or the e-course that I have through my website. Or of course, we're going to have a large section for questions after this. You can join our private Facebook group where we have all kinds of interesting discussions about water research. You can always reach out to me personally. I'm never too busy to talk about water. So anything that really fascinates you, take a note of that. Because as we said, each of us is made of water, and so each of us has a relationship to water. And yet we often go through our lives completely unaware of this relationship, even though it subtly affects our lives very deeply on every level. So I want to start with a story, and drop a comment in the chat if you've heard this story before. So in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God moved over the face of the water. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from above from the waters below. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Can you raise your hand? Well, this is the opening line of Genesis in the Bible. This is what Christians thought was most important to say first in their creation story, right? First, there was nothing, there was no sound, no light. Before consciousness had even conceived of these things, there was only God and water. And from the way that God moved in the water, everything else was born. So that's the Christian creation myth. And all over the world, ancient people agree. So there are similar creation stories from the Egyptians, the Polynesians, the African and Native American tribes, the Greeks, and just countless others. They all say that first there was water, and then all of life was born from the movement of water. Some say water and light, some say fresh water, salt water, and light. But in every creation story, water is the central modus operandi of creation. And even in our modern Western creation myth, right, evolution, it says that life began in the oceans in a primordial soup. Even before Pangea, the first landmass, there was this giant worldwide ocean called Panthalassa. And from this primordial soup, as single cells, life began in Mother Earth's bloodstream, right? And then gradually we adapted to carry the Earth's water within our own bodies as our blood so that we could walk on land. But this is just the scientific version of the exact same story, right? Adaptation, evolution, whatever name you put on it, life comes from water. So let's learn from these stories. If water moves to create life, how does it move? How does it move within nature? How does it move within our bodies? And how can we work with that movement for healthier bodies and a healthier planet? So we know that for life to exist, there has to be water, right? Every seed, every embryo starts its life in water. It's the first indicator of life that we look for on other planets. And as with all life forms, it takes a masculine and a feminine principle uniting to create it. So of course, we all know that water is H2O, right? Dihydrogen oxide. Well, oxygen is the feminine negatively charged element, so abundant in the atmosphere of our Mother Earth. And hydrogen is the masculine positively charged aspect of the pairing, created in the hydrogen core of our Father Sun. And because our bodies are almost entirely water, that makes us like the merging, right? The love making of masculine and feminine. Because water is the love. Water is the electromagnetic bond. Because hydrogen and oxygen desire to be together, all of life is possible. So take a moment to just feel yourself as this sacred merging of masculine and feminine. Feel the blood coursing in your veins. Feel your cerebral spinal fluid in your spinal column. Feel the saliva in your mouth. Really feel yourself as this liquid life force. So water seems really familiar, right? Really common, really simple, but actually it's a total mystery. There are over 63 anomalies about water that science doesn't understand yet, that just baffle scientists for 63 different reasons. And for centuries or longer, scientists that have attempted to answer these questions about water, to provide some insight into this ultimate mystery. They've been ridiculed, they've been attacked, they've been censored. And in some really old books, actually, authors' attempts to describe their observations about water have been censored or even omitted in later editions of the book because, and this is what's important to realize, if the truth about water were known, our entire economy would destabilize. Life on this planet could not exist as it currently does because inherent in water is a powerful supercomputer capable of free energy generation, infinite information storage, and even levitation, and so much more. I'm going to get to all of that later. I hope that's enticed you to stay to the end. There's some really incredible capacities of water, but let's just start with the basics, right? Let's start with our basic understanding of what water is. So, how about some of these anomalies, right? Like the fact that water is the only substance on Earth.
I will try and accommodate all your requirements.
Who is that? Oh, sorry. Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, the simplicity of water and the complexity of water and our basic understanding of it, right? So one of these anomalies is the fact that water is the only substance on Earth found in all three phases, solid, liquid, and gas, and even a fourth phase that we'll talk about later. So it's really an enigma, not to mention like the strange behavior of its viscosity and its potential pressure, which science still can't explain. Like, how does a delicate little dandelion force its way through solid concrete? It's because the water inside of it can reach up to 400 atmospheres of pressure. That defies our common understanding of Newtonian physics, right? Every property of water sustains life in incredible ways. And water is capable of incredible feats of surface tension. In fact, just a few molecules of structured water together can be bonded with the tensile strength of steel. In fact, there were these scientists at the US Department, I think it's the US Department of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, U.S. Department of Energy at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, anyway, ORNL, they discovered that water molecules that are under extreme physical pressure or certain geological conditions, they can actually arrange themselves into these super small hexagonal shapes around a ring and enter what they call a quantum tunneling state. Now, in this quantum tunneling state, water particles can actually pass through solid walls. They can pass through solid walls. And there's a researcher named Kolesnikov who showed that water can not only bilocate, it can even sextilocate, meaning the same water molecule can occupy at least 6 or more locations at once. And this provides, I think, some really interesting insight into the stories of ancient yogis who had so mastered their physical bodies that they too were able to bilocate and trilocate according to some of the ancient stories, right? Some of the siddhis or the powers that they have can actually be explained by a lot of the properties of water. So water is really wacky, obviously. As you can see, it really behaves unlike anything else on Earth. There is no other liquid even remotely similar. And even if one of these strange properties were different, then life on this planet would not be possible. For example, if water didn't become strangely less dense as it freezes, then it wouldn't float to the surface, and all of life in lakes and streams would just die every winter. But instead, ice forms at the top, unlike other liquids wherein when it freezes, it would sink to the bottom. So ice forms at the top, which actually insulates all of the water, the fluid water that's underneath it, and sustains life. So everything that water does, she does to sustain life. She, again, defies our known understandings of physics in order to do this. She plays by her own rules. And why wouldn't water play by its own rules? Because it is the one and only conduit of life. So anything inanimate would, of course, be easier to explain. But water is not inanimate. Water is life. And so she baffles scientists again and again. Life is a mystery and water is life. So water will forever remain a mystery, no matter how much we try to solve her mysteries. So in beginning to try to solve some of these mysteries and understand her really odd behavior, we're beginning to realize that we've actually been approaching water wrong all along. We've been looking at H2O molecules singularly, or scientists have been looking at H2O molecules singularly. But that's kind of like trying to study one human being to understand humanity as a whole, right? Just like humanity, water is actually a community of individuals that they interlock and interweave in these molecular structures that give them these unique social behaviors. And the way that water molecules come together is everything. It determines everything about the way that that water behaves, the phase, the state of that water. So you can sort of think of it like relationships in a community. So if the molecules are all unstructured, if they're disconnected, it's what we call bulk water. And that's where random bonds are all forming and breaking apart billions of times per second, and they can't communicate, they can't transfer information. Now, of course, we all know for any good relationship, there has to be good communication, right? So the molecules need to stay in connection, as you can see demonstrated on this video here. These molecules are tightly bound together in these hexagonal structures with really strong electrostatic hydrogen bonds that allow them to communicate. So each cluster of water molecules, you'll see the larger icosahedral clusters form in a sec here. So each cluster has over 440,000 panels on it, each one of those little clusters. Now, each one of those 440,000 panels is responsible for sensing, storing, and communicating information about its environment. Water is extremely sensitive to its environment, to all kinds of stimuli. So when the molecules are bonded together in this hexagonal, sacred geometric icosahedral patterns, they can transmit information and communicate at vast distances faster than the speed of light. Now this instantaneous communication is called quantum coherence. Quantum coherence, and it's part of what gives water its incredible intelligence. So coherence, right? Coherence is the ability of, it's like the ability of multiple components to act together as one unit. So your body, for example, you are a coherent being because you're a multitude of cells and organs and nerve fibers and et cetera, but your body is coherent because it acts all together as one unit. So when water is structured, it's able to act together cohesively as one intelligent being. And or like a fabric, for example, like a fabric is made of many different threads, right? Maybe thousands of threads. But because those threads are woven together in a particular pattern, it can act cohesively as one piece of fabric, right? So we see the same thing in other parts of nature, like with carbon atoms, for example. If I have structured carbon atoms in my left hand and unstructured carbon in my right hand, I'm holding coal and a diamond or graphite. They look completely different, although they're all just carbon. So it's really the structure that differentiates chaos from order. And molecular structure in an organized and repeating pattern is the definition of a crystal, whether we're talking about a quartz or a diamond or an amethyst or whatever. Its molecular constituents are in a repeating matrix. They're in a formation so they can store information. Write that one down in your notes. That one's key. If it's in a formation, it can store information. So you can see here the difference between diamond, coal, and graphite just based on the structure of the molecules. So let's look at another crystalline structure, silicon dioxide or SiO2, because its structure is actually really similar to H2O. It forms the same kind of hexagonal bonds just like water, and when it does, you get a quartz crystal. So what are some of the properties of a crystal? Well, it can absorb, store, emit, amplify, and transduce piezoelectric energies. Absorb, store, emit, amplify, and transduce, because its molecular arrangement is in a formation. That's literally the definition of a crystal. Well, water does the exact same thing. It's able to absorb, store, emit, amplify, and transduce energies when its molecular arrangement is structured. So it is literally a liquid crystal. So obviously water's lattice matrices are more flexible because they're not glued together by the protons, which is why it stays liquid. But again, it's capable of these same crystalline properties. So let's revisit carbon again. So just based on its structure, carbon is capable of being so many different substances. Well, this is the difference between structured and unstructured water. The distinctions between the ways that it can be structured makes all the difference. So it's going to look like a clear liquid no matter what, but it behaves very differently in the environment and in our bodies. It tastes very different. It hydrates you very differently, almost to the point of being a different substance entirely. In fact, Dr. Gerald Pollack calls it a fourth phase of water beyond solid, liquid, and gas. He calls it EZ, or exclusionary zone water. There's also another phase called EXW, or electrically expanded water. And there are a lot more. There are a lot of different ways that these molecules can come together. But today we're mostly just going to discuss the general H3O2 and EXW crystalline waters, because that's the kind of water that you're made of, and it's generally the best kind to drink. There's also, gel water that's inside your cells, etc. But we're going to talk about mostly about the ones that you're able to actually consume, because most of what we're consuming is just dead, bulk, unstructured water that's really not channeling any information or hydrating us very well at all. So if you think that maybe molecular structure doesn't make any difference to plain old ordinary water, and this all kind of sounds a bit like hoodoo voodoo, I invite you to maybe propose to your girlfriend with a lump of coal instead of a diamond, and then tell her, oh honey, it's just carbon, either way. Structure really makes all the difference, right? So for water to form this crystalline lattice of hexagonal hydrogen bonds, this magical arrangement, this liquid crystal, right? Movement is a really, really crucial factor. So remember we talked about how the movement of water was featured in creation myths? Well, spiral motion is largely what creates this living crystalline water in nature. So we also talked about how some creation myths distinguish between life being created from the merging of fresh water and salt water. As it turns out, some minerals, some salts, electrolytes act as nanocolloids that can also structure water. Some creation myths talk about the interplay of water, salt, and light in creation, and as we'll see here in a second, certain bandwidths of light frequency or radiant energy can also structure water. Basically, we just want to look at the ways that nature uplifts water into its living state. And it's most common in nature through this spiral motion. So when all of the molecules flow together freely in a spiral, when you get this vortexing movement, normally on the northern hemisphere, it's counterclockwise. Normally on the southern hemisphere, it's clockwise with some exceptions, but it's like a toroid, right? Even if you study the hydrological patterns, the weather patterns of how water moves around the planet, it's really generating this toroid of electrical frequencies that the water is carrying. So everywhere in nature, water moves in spirals, right? Cyclones, water down the drain, the way that a plant grows in a spiral Fibonacci pattern, natural rivers, which have spiral fluid in the stream that keeps the water cool, it keeps the river clean, it prevents any sediment from building up, and also in spring water. Usually the most common way is through movement, right? But it can also become structured through radiant energy, through sunlight, especially near infrared light, or magnetism, like think of the paramagnetic rock deep underground in aquifers. Other kinds of radiant energy, piezoelectric pressure, hydrophilic surfaces, such as found inside your body, the collagen in your body and your cells, epitaxy or transference, which is why you see a lot of people putting crystals in their water. We'll get to that more in a minute. So there's lots of different ways, right? So the same principles apply within your body. Water is always spiraling in nature, right? Well, water is always spiraling inside your body too. So Science has now contradicted the long-held belief that water, or that the heart pumps blood. Because as a muscle, it's actually not strong enough to pump blood through the body. And yet that's still written in so many biology textbooks. Oh, the heart pumps blood, but actually it's not strong enough. Instead, it acts as a vortex that moves blood into the veins, which actually have spiral striations on the inside of them. And then that spiral motion is what gives the blood enough momentum to actually make it through your entire body. So you can think of how a rifle barrel has these fins on the inside of it that make the bullet spin as it comes out. So it comes out more quickly. It's really the same principle in your veins too. So it's the same in your spinal column. So interestingly, the German word for spinal column is spiral column. And the German word for vertebrae is vortices, because your cerebral spinal fluid also moves in a spiral up and down your spine from root to crown and back. Amazing, right? And the next time you pee, maybe take a look down at your urethra and notice that even your urine comes out in a spiral. Our bodies are mirrors of the earth. We are smaller holographic projections of the earth's larger wholeness, and our bodies are like small bits of sea, these personal oceans that we get to tend to, right? So by understanding the earth's patterns and the hydrological patterns in all of nature, we can understand our own aquatic bodies better, and vice versa. By understanding our own aquatic bodies better, these oceanic aquariums contained in skin that we call bodies, by understanding our bodies better, then we can understand the earth better as well. So I really think that one of the most powerful ways to influence the health of the planet's water as a whole is to ennoble our own body waters. Because water has this principle of behavior known as transference, like we mentioned in the last slide, right? So this transference property allows higher quality crystalline water to actually uplift and ennoble lower quality water in its vicinity. So if your body is made of highly structured water, you will affect the body water of the people around you, right? You will affect whatever water comes into your body that you drink and then back out into the watershed. You will affect the bodies of water that you swim in. You will be a physically healing presence in the world. So I think that's a really good place to start in this new understanding of water, is to start with our own bodies. So what then is the practical application of understanding that water is life, like we talked about first, and that it's a crystal, like we just discovered, that it is innately a living liquid crystal? What's the practical application? How does this shift our way of being in the world? Well, I think first, out of respect to the entity that gives us life, I think we can stop treating it as an inanimate object. I think that's a good place to start. And then from there, we can start to harvest and store and imbibe it in ways that honor, ennoble, and uplift it. So we can actually create our bodies out of the most incredibly intelligent and vivacious entity in the universe. So like we said before, like a crystal, water whose molecules are in a formation can store information, right? So that means that by drinking this water, you actually become more intelligent. Your body contains more information, more frequencies of the spectrum of vibration. Now, Viktor Schauberger, who is my personal hero of all time, drop a note in the comments, in the chat, if you know of Viktor Schauberger, if you've heard of him. He's the most brilliant water genius of all time. Like what Tesla was for electricity, Schauberger was for water. Incredible. So anyway, he actually attributed the great genius of his just incredible wisdom to the fact that he made himself of the highest quality water. Now, regardless of whether you believe that crystals have healing properties or not, that's kind of subjective, right? But it is unequivocal that we use crystals in watches and computers because they store information. And your body is intelligent enough to be able to tell the difference between structured water and unstructured water. And your body will preferentially choose more crystalline water. In fact, within a month, and I've heard even within just 5 gallons of drinking high quality water, you can actually replace your entire body volume. So as we discussed, your body has natural vortices to spiral your body water, and it also has a lot of other systems in place to make sure that your body water is pretty well structured as well. Sorry, I just realized that how quickly this video is going. If it starts to give you vertigo, you can look away from the screen. I had to speed it up so it would all fit on one slide, but this is your fascia. It's some of the, maybe in the top 3 most highly structured water of your body. It's 75 to 80% water, and then 20 to 25% protein. And it's all hydrophilic, just like your cells, like your collagen, everything is hydrophilic, which again helps structure the water, create exclusionary zone, easy water. So it's actually been shown that acupuncture meridians and the nadis that the ancient yogic texts spoke about may actually just be these really long strands of highly, highly structured water molecules, these fascial networks. They mapped the ancient meridian systems over the newly discovered fascial networks, and they found almost an exact one-to-one mirroring. So these meridian systems basically map over this fascial network, and this fascial network connects every single cell of your body and allows for the immediate transference of energy and information through the body. So it actually conducts electrical signals at the speed of sound, 700 miles per hour, way faster than nerve signals. It was once thought that nerves were the only part of the body that conducts electrical signals. Turns out the fascia conducts that much faster, due to these properties of quantum coherence. So it's some of the most structured water in your body after the water that's found in your DNA. If you look over on the left side of the screen, you can see that your DNA is actually surrounded by chains of extremely highly structured water with super strong hydrogen bonds. And this is largely what keeps the chiral integrity of the double helix tightly twisted and intact. If your body water starts to lose its structure over time, your DNA can actually start to lose its integrity as well. Now, Viktor Schauberger claimed that drinking the highest quality water allowed him to access his ancestral memories, directly access his ancestral memories. Now, this was way before the discovery of DNA, but I believe, personally, my little theory is that he had that direct experience because his DNA was surrounded by the most incredibly intelligent crystalline matrix. Now, your DNA is meant to be a cymatic antenna of perceptive clathrate icosahedral water geometries. And you can actually tell a huge difference between the body water of a younger person versus an older person, specifically in the water surrounding their DNA. In fact, the most accurate measures of your true biological age are your intracellular hydration and the hydrogen bond strength, or the level of structure in your biowater. They're the most accurate measures of your true biological age. That is groundbreaking. There are doctors who say that aging is really just a process of your body drying out, because when we're born, we are 80% water. And by the time we're an elder, that number drops to around 50%. These are average numbers. So really, aging is a process of drying out, and drinking high quality water helps your body stay younger longer. It keeps your collagen tight, it keeps your DNA healthy, it keeps your cell membranes intact, it neutralizes free radicals. In fact, the more we learn about it, the more we realize it might just be the key to youth and longevity and gene expression. You know, geneticists will say, oh, aging is actually a factor of your telomeres losing integrity on the end of the DNA strands. But when you look at the interaction of water with telomeres, it's actually that the telomeres lose their integrity because of dehydration, or the destructuring of the water molecules inside the DNA. It's a secondary effect. So we talked about how movement in water is so important. The water we drink should have plenty of movement, right? But by contrast, stagnant water, like the kind of water that probably most of us drink, right? Municipal water or bottled water, it also leads to stagnation of qi in the body. Now, according to Eastern medicine, Stagnation is the root of all disease and inflammation and stress. So water is like a child. It loves to move. It loves to play. In nature, it's always, bubbling and babbling and flowing and changing states and shifting through various phases of the hydrological cycle and shifting from watershed to watershed. It swirls and it eddies. And just like a child, if it has to sit still for too long, it becomes unhappy and even unhealthy. Just like you, if you sit still for too long, you would start to get kind of achy, right? And if you were to continue sitting still, you would get sick. And if you were forced to continue sitting still, especially in an enclosed container, you would feel imprisoned, wouldn't you? But this is what we do to our water. We seal it up and we set it on a shelf in these little plastic gravestones, water gravestones on a shelf, or we store it up in a reservoir or holding tank. But like us, water doesn't just need to move, she also needs to breathe. She needs to exchange gases like oxygen and carbonic acid. She needs to move to keep herself clean and prevent sedimentation. And she needs to move in order to keep herself cool, because water likes to be cool. It helps maintain the integrity of the hydrogen bonds. In fact, something I should have added to the other slide is temperature. Temperature is key in the formation of water structure. Well, not in the formation of water structure, but in helping water structure to stay structured, to keep its integrity. The more water warms up, the more it loses the integrity of those hydrogen bonds. So we want to keep our water cool. And because your body is mostly water, speaking of kids playing, can you guys hear the kids, my neighbors playing outside? So since your body is mostly water too, physical movement is also a really key aspect of hydration. So we think of hydration as just being how much water you drink, but that's actually irrigation. And I like to distinguish the two between irrigation and hydration. So hydration is actually the chemical process by which water molecules bind with proteins and other substances, whereas irrigation is just how much water you drink, which doesn't always make a lot of difference to actual hydration, because if you're not drinking high quality water, you're just going to pee it out anyways. And if your body isn't optimized to be able to absorb the water that you drink, again, you're not going to get the benefit from how much you irrigate. So irrigation and hydration are technically different, but for hydration, the human body is like this hydraulic pump system. And anytime you're squeezing, twisting, contracting, you're delivering all of this hydration more deeply into your tissues through this fascial network that is feeding along your screen right now. So our spinal column and our joints are also really central to this hydraulic system too, along with the fascia. It surrounds all of our muscles, it connects every single cell, and it's a large part of what determines how much intracellular hydration you can actually get is by the health of your fascia. All of this cell-to-cell signaling is largely the fascia and the gap junctions. We won't talk much about gap junctions and phase angles in this talk, but if you're interested in really optimizing your hydration, I have a whole nother free video and blog post and all of that on my site. I definitely recommend checking that out. It goes pretty deep, super interesting. But we're just going to touch on the basics today. So bear in mind that within 5 minutes of drinking water, it becomes your blood. Within 5 minutes, it becomes your blood. So naturally, water comes from the ground, right? And our blood is bestowed to us by Mother Earth. But in the current paradigm, we have all of these surrogate stand-ins between ourselves and the source. Just like churches and priests have inserted themselves as surrogate spiritual stand-ins between humans and God, the source of our spiritual life, and governments have inserted themselves as surrogate stand-ins between humans and freedom, the source of our worldly life. Now we have these corporate and municipal surrogate stand-ins between ourselves and the source of our physical life, which is, of course, water. So in this system, we're actually buying our own blood. It's this strange slave-like paradigm. We're either paying the city government for water to make our blood, or we're paying corporations for it at the store. So a big part of my mission is to help people remember that water comes from the earth. And we can make ourselves of the very highest quality water, literally the cleanest and most intelligent substance on the planet. And by doing so, we actually reclaim our sovereignty, the sovereignty of our blood and our very being. So we all evolved, according to the standard Western narrative, we all evolved from creatures that lived in the sea. And we've adapted to carry the Earth's oceans within us as our own bloodstream. But this life on dry land has largely led us to forget that we are primarily still aquatic life forms. The only way life was able to leave the ocean was by adapting to carry the oceans with it. In fact, human fetuses actually still have gills when they develop in the internal oceans of the womb. You once had gills. And amniotic fluid actually mirrors the mineral composition of the ocean exactly. The electrolyte ratios of your blood plasma is an exact mirror of ocean water. Same ratios of calcium and carbonic acid and chloride and sulfur, sodium, potassium, all these things, magnesium, phosphoric acid, everything you see here. This chart, when I first saw this chart, blew my mind. You can see the main difference is just being that blood plasma also contains protein anions, but otherwise the ratios are almost completely parallel. So your cerebral spinal fluid, for example, is only one single molecule different from seawater. You are literally a drop of the ocean. That aquarium analogy I used earlier was less a metaphor than you might think. So the state of your extracellular matrix that really runs your inner ecosystem, it really regulates your immune response too. In fact, there was a Nobel laureate by the name of Dr. Alexis Carrel, and he actually demonstrated that cells can live almost indefinitely when kept in an optimal environment. He showed that the cell is actually immortal. It's only the fluid surrounding the cell that degenerates. He was actually able to keep heart tissue alive in the lab for over 30 years by immersing it in an environment of oceanic marine plasma. Now, all of life for 2 billion years of evolution existed only in the ocean. And humans have been around in our current state for around 200,000 years, right? But for 2 billion years, life was oceanic. So the whole structure and function and design of life is based on this aquatic environment. The ocean was life's terrain. And as René Canton said, he said the only way that life was eventually able to leave the oceans was by learning to carry the ocean inside of their bodies as their bloodstreams, right? So the Earth's oceans actually contain the blueprint for life. They are the storehouse of genetic information arcing back to the primordial soup. This goes really deep. I want to do a whole nother webinar just on this topic, but we're just going to, again, touch briefly on things here. So we make sure to spend a lot of time and care and effort ensuring that the food that we eat is of the highest quality, right? Making sure that it's organic and farm to table and biodynamic and gluten-free and expensive, and etc. But I believe that, not just I believe, I know for a fact, and it's a bold statement, but it is true. The water that we make ourselves of is actually even more important than the food that we eat, because yes, you are 2/3 or 70% water volumetrically, but molecularly, we are 99.92-ish% water molecules. So you can really think of your body as like a fish tank, an aquarium containing the ocean, because you are a drop of the sea. Remember, your cerebral spinal fluid is only one molecule different from seawater. And the fish are your cells and your microbiome. Now imagine you have a fish tank and you're feeding those fish really, really high quality fish flakes, but you've got swag stagnant water in there. Well, the fish are not going to last for very long. But imagine that you have extremely high quality, vibrant water in the tank, but the flakes that you feed them are just so-so, right? Well, the fish are still going to thrive pretty well. Again, our bodies are mirrors of the earth. So our bodies are 70% water by volume, and so is the earth. So stewarding the hydrological cycles of the earth is absolutely key for environmental sustainability. So let's take a broader scope now. We've been looking at our little mini hydrological cycles within our bodies. Now let's take a look at the broader hydrological cycles of the earth as a whole and its implications for environmental sustainability. So let's honor the water that we're made of. right? Because there's no difference between the water inside you and the water outside you. They are the same. It's only in forgetting the simple fact that we've gotten ourselves mired into the ecological disasters that we're in. But by remembering that the waters inside of us are the same as the waters outside of us, we can make massive impact ecologically, societally, medicinally, agriculturally, politically. Water influences every aspect of our lives individually and collectively, and it's time that we remember that. So when we treat water inhumanely, water disappears. And by objectifying and commodifying water, we create conditions of scarcity where none naturally exist in nature. Water is abundant. So how do we actually treat the source of life? Well, we shit in it and we piss in it and we use it as a chemical carrier for chemical weapons and insecticides and pesticides, right? We would never treat any living being in this way. It would be inhumane, not to mention illegal, and yet we treat the physical embodiment of life itself in this way. So with this kind of treatment, it's no wonder that water is disappearing, right? And it will continue to disappear for as long as we treat it as an inanimate object. In the year 2050, it's estimated that 1 out of every 2 people will not have access to clean water. Currently, 1 out of every 3 people has no consistent access to clean water. In 30 years, half the population will not. That's super soon. In fact, if you watch the stock markets, you can actually see a trend where the top % of wealthy people in the world are investing heavily in water, more so than oil or anything else. Blue gold is the new black gold. They are snapping up water rights and privatizing water and investing in desalination plants. They're really trying to capitalize on, and in the process, actually exacerbating the creation of this arid and desertified future. So according to the World Health Organization, 80% of disease worldwide is caused by lack of access to clean water. This is something we can solve, guys. More people die from lack of access to water than from war. 10 times more. That's 1,000% more people. 40% of interstate conflicts over the past 60 years were associated with water resources, and 80% of the major armed conflicts have occurred in dry, arid ecosystems. And if this was spoken by the World Bank vice president in the 90s, he said, if the wars of the 20th century were fought over oil, the wars of the 21st century would be fought over water. And we are already seeing how incredibly true this is. For as often as we hear about places like Syria and Darfur in the news, what you nearly never hear is that originally these were fundamentally issues of desertification. I can point to 1,000 other examples. There was drought, so much that people could no longer live and farm on their land. So it created refugees, and there was a fight over arable land and resources because so many people were displaced by drought. And instead of addressing the hydrological cycle, the government in Darfur just sent in the Janjaweed, and it caused the deaths of, 1 million people? Now, I'm sorry, but that's a preview of what's to come because the earth is desertifying really quickly. And Viktor Schauberger actually predicted this. In the late 1800s, he saw the way that water was being treated, and he laid out all of the consequences of what he could foresee happening in the future. And all of that is coming to pass now, right down to climate change. There's a whole post on my site, a whole video, lots of links and resources. I highly encourage you to go check it out. We're not going to go deep into this, but it's important to know that the depletion of the hydrological cycle is just as great a cause, if not an even greater cause of global warming than greenhouse gas emissions. And addressing the hydrological cycle is not only a faster solution, it's also a cheaper solution, and it's the only long-lasting solution to climate change, far more effective than halting carbon emissions, because even if we were to halt carbon emissions 100%, halt all of them by tomorrow, it would still take us hundreds of years to restore the climate. But if we address the hydrological cycle, it could be done really quickly. That's a bit off topic, but you get the point. Look, next we want to talk about what would the world look like if the highest expression of water was facilitated. What would life be like on the planet if we actually implemented some of these discoveries about water? Because not only is water life, water is also peace, and water is prosperity. And the right relations with water can foster cooperation and equality, creating peace on earth more so than anything else. So what's possible? Well, possibilities are really endless, but we'll just go over a few. So first, there will be fewer natural disasters. So scientists have found that when large quantities of water are unstructured, and when they're exposed to negative imprinting, and when they're kept stagnant, and when they are rerouted, they behave in really erratic ways. Hydrologists call this aggressive water or aggressive solvent. It really results in an increase in typhoons and cyclones and tsunamis, just like we've been seeing over the last decades. And all of this could be mitigated if the world's waters were treated differently. Even flooding would vastly decrease if rivers were allowed to take their natural meandering course. But all over the world, waterways have been artificially shifted. They've been rerouted to be more straight, because in the Western mind, right, the shortest distance between point A and point B is a straight line. But that's not how nature works ever. When water moves in a straight line, sediment builds up and it warms up and it's more prone to flooding its banks. But when water moves naturally, it actually moves more quickly because it meanders. It creates a spiral within the stream. When that spiral flow of the water prevents sedimentation, there's more room for vegetation on the banks, which also prevents. The next possibility is that agriculture would be completely transformed. So you need 20 to 50% less water when you're using structured water, and the plants that you grow end up having about 600% more photon radiation. So that's the energy that can be measured like in a Kirlian photograph or an EKG, the amount of energy, the amount of light energy that it's putting off. So the plants also end up having a lot more nutrient density, more vitamins, so you don't need to use fertilizers or pesticides in vegetation that's sprayed with this kind of water. And another really interesting cutting edge water discovery right now that I'm really excited about is depending on the bandwidth of the light spectrum that you expose water to, it can actually increase its inherent levels of certain minerals in the soil. Or this even works really well with hydroponic plants as well. So for example, if you expose water to green light, it's going to create more nitrogen in the plants. If you expose water to yellow light, they're going to have more magnesium. Orange light is calcium, and etc. So you can actually nourish these plants according to your specific needs as an agriculturalist. Really cool stuff. So we could put an end to world hunger. Now, Schauberger actually discovered the means by which water creates and regenerates itself. It has to do with the freedom and the stability of the hydrogen atoms, whether they form a 104-degree or 109-degree bond. Now, hydrogen in Latin literally means hydro, water, and gen, creating, right? So hydrogen creates water under the right circumstances. I mean, as a living being, water is fully capable of reproducing, and makes sense, right? This is truly groundbreaking. It's really a paradigm shifting discovery, because right now hydrologists are convinced that, oh, all the water that's on the planet now is all the water that's ever been here, is all the water that will ever be here, and that it's just a limited closed loop system. And that's actually not true. So desertified areas could become lush forests, and food would be able to be grown just about anywhere. We could literally put an end to world hunger. Another thing, and this one is pretty cool, I'm excited about this one too. Well, I mean, I'm clearly excited about all of them, but I think this one would be amazing and not too hard to implement. It would be a huge project, but anyway, basically, there are a lot of different ways that water could create renewable, sustainable, and regenerative energy. And one of the coolest is that if all of the pipes used to transfer water were switched to pipes that have spiral striations in them, then those pipes would actually be passively generating energy. We remember how we talked about how your veins have spiral striations on the inside of them that help your blood to flow, and water doesn't just flow in a stream, it spirals in the stream, so it actually moves faster. And all of these different spirals in nature, well, if we were to work with the pipes in plumbing this way, the effects are really, really cool. So you can actually get pipes like this. If you're a homeowner and you wanted to switch all of the pipes in your house to those that can create really high quality water, there's a link on my website with a discount code. It's at alivewater.com, but you'll find a discount code somewhere on my site for that. You can add them to your shower head. You can replace the pipes under your house. But in general, if we were to do this in citywide, right, if a whole city were to use these kind of pipes, then just the plumbing alone could power the city's entire electrical grid. There would be no need for electricity to power or pump it, because the way it works is, so water flowing through a spiral enclosure actually experiences less resistance as the velocity is increased. And at some points, it can even get down to less than zero resistance, which again is generating energy. So not only would you not need to use electricity to pump the water through city infrastructures, but you could passively harvest the electricity. And the water would need to be treated. No bacteria can grow in that kind of water. Say goodbye to fluoride and chlorine and all of that crap, which I go over a lot. If you're interested in like specific kinds of drinking water and how they affect us differently, I have resources for that on my site too. I'm not going to go into that here, but water is actually capable, just pure water, of even having antibiotic properties naturally without any treatment. In fact, the military actually even uses some really high quality water as antibiotics in the field when real antibiotics aren't available to them. So good high quality water doesn't need to be treated, and it can generate energy. So what else is possible? Well, not just regenerative, sustainable energy, but also free energy. So there's a few different ways that it happens. One is that, so Dr. Gerald Pollack discovered that structured water, or EZ, exclusionary zone water, has a negative charge, and bulk water has a positive charge. So if you were to put a diode into each of those layers, then you've created a battery right there. It's infinite free energy generation, right? But that's not the only way. So also when water is in a vortex, again, it can reach such high velocity that it has less than zero resistance, generating energy. And these are really, I mean, when you think about it, these capabilities are some of the reasons why carriers of water wisdom have been so persecuted in the past, right? Because it does not serve the status quo to have free energy available to all people through an easily accessible and self-regenerating resource. So one of Schauberger's most incredible discoveries is that nature actually has these two fundamental movements. One that it uses when it wants to decompose and biodegrade, like when things die and decay in nature, then nature uses this more masculine force of energy that radiates outward. It's explosive, it's warming, it expels energy, right? So this is actually the principle that all of human technology is currently based on. It uses this outward radiating explosive energy, and it's effective, but it wastes a lot of energy, and it's actually destructive. So considering that this is what all of human technology is based on, is it any wonder that our technology is destructive to the planet? Versus the motion that nature uses when she wants to create and enliven and grow and nourish, then she creates an implosive spiral. So rather than an explosive radiating outward in a linear way that expels energy that's destructive, instead the energy radiates inward upon itself like a vortex, spiraling inward and inward, that generates more energy. This is how nature never gets tired, because it's endlessly generating free energy through this implosive principle, through all of these imploding spirals in nature. So if human beings, if we were to take a 180-degree turn and we switch the principle that our technology was based on, not only could everything run on infinitely free energy, but it would also be in alliance with nature, and it would foster balance and harmony with nature instead of being destructive to it. If our technologies were water-based instead of fire-based, if they were implosive instead of explosive. When I really started studying this and came to understand its deeper implications on every level, it's seriously one of the most profound things I've ever learned in my life. I highly recommend you study Schauberger if you're interested in that kind of thing. So, all right, so another possibility would be space and time travel. Now, stick with me here. I'm serious. I know it sounds outlandish, but space and time travel. So vortexes actually bring in raw energy to use in the creative process. And in the center of a vortex, there's theoretically infinite velocity. There's this book called Vortex, The Key to Future Science, which I highly recommend. Vortex, The Key to Future Science. Definitely write that one down. It explores the possibility that basically that the speed of light is only the fastest speed possible here in the third dimensional reality. But when you have a vortex with faster than the speed of light, infinite velocity at the center, it can pierce through the space-time continuum. Another possibility is levitation and weightlessness. So vortexes actually uplift electrolytes into ormus elements. That basically an ormus element is they're mono and diatomic elements, and because they are so light, they actually levitate. They work based on the Meissner principle in opposition to electromagnetic gravitational forces on the planet. So yeah, they levitate, they can rise. And in fact, Schauberger even created a flying machine. So for every force in nature, there's an equal and opposite force, right? Well, for the force of gravity, there is also a force of levity. This is how sap rises in trees. Remember, sap is mostly water. So this water has levitational forces that allow it to rise in trees. How do salmon swim all the way up waterfalls? Because they get in the very center of a vortex formed in the stream. They can swim upstream, they can jump up waterfalls. There are countless examples of this in nature. So yeah, Schauberger actually created a flying machine. Of course, you know, his writings and drawings were confiscated after his death. There's a whole story around that, unfortunately, with the US government involved. But that's another story. So another possibility would be predictive prescience, meaning foresight, predictive capability. So there are already scientists in the world who are using water to predict solar flares and sunspot activity up to a week beforehand. Water knows when that's about to happen, scientifically validated and used in a lot of labs. It can also predict earthquakes in advance. And I think so far we're really only scratching the surface in this capacity of water's predictive capabilities and its ability to communicate information. I mean, we've talked about how it can store information, but I feel like that terminology really makes it sound like a computer or like an object. And more accurately, I believe that it is a vibrantly intelligent and timeless being who is here to teach us and who has access to all of the wisdom in the universe. When Viktor Schauberger went to the river to contemplate, he said that the water gave him ideas and insights and visions and inventions. He had a practice where he would send his consciousness down the stream, flowing with the water, and when his consciousness returned to him, the water had been imbued with information. And this is only one of the myriad practices of hydromancy or divination using water. Countless cultures have these different practices of hydromancy, like Nostradamus. He actually made all of his predictions by scrying or staring into a black bowl filled with water. And by staring into this water, he was given all of the foresight to predict the future for the next, 200 or 300 years with incredible accuracy. The Kogi Tribe in Colombia, for example, they have a practice of hydromancy where they drop beads in a gourd full of water and they read the way that the bubbles come up. And the water is answering their questions through those bubbles. What was it? The oracle at Delphi. So the oracle at Delphi would actually inhale vapors from the Casotus spring before she would go into a trance. And in old Celtic traditions, they would use hydromancy for all kinds of things, like even down to like determining the guilt or innocence of a suspected criminal, or in matters of love and romance. You know, if you tossed your lover's shirt onto the water, you know, based on whether it floated or sank, you could, you know, get your questions answered. So all throughout history in tons of different cultures, we see these different practices of hydromancy practiced in so many different ways. And we're already seeing it again being practiced to predict solar flares, sunspot activity, and earthquakes in labs. And who knows what else is possible. with this. I mean, water is ancient and water remembers. And if water does have this connection fundamentally to the ethers, to the quantum field, that is not limited by space and time, right? Okay, before we get too out there, just a couple more things that are kind of out there. So remote communication. So even at 100,000 kilometers, you can still imprint water with extremely subtle energies through quantum coherence, like we talked about earlier. Water can communicate with other water molecules at vast distances, and even over small distances too. So if you were to put 2 glasses of water together, and one is really high quality crystal water and the other isn't, the better quality water will actually imprint on the lesser quality. And there's a theory that ESP might just be a function of the highly structured water that surrounds your brain, acting with this quantum coherence principle, communicating with the water surrounding another person's brain. Amazing, right? So another possibility is extreme health and longevity and vitality. So imagine if all of the water in the world had the healing capabilities of Bernadette's Grotto in Lourdes, France, or Zamzam, or Tlacote, Mexico, or Nadana, India. These certain springs are world famous for their healing properties. Like, people make pilgrimages to visit these healing springs from all over the world. Just in Lourdes, for example, if you just take that one spring, there have been 66 scientifically documented and proven cases of miracle healings from that water, and of course thousands upon thousands of anecdotal unproven stories of healings that have been collected over the centuries from that water. And all water has this potential. Healing could be a daily occurrence. And again, if you're curious as to what makes that particular water so different and so healing, largely it has a lot to do with the hydrogen and some other factors. I have a whole post on that on my site too. Really interesting stuff. But yeah, water has the capability to be medicinal. Mental and emotional health. I'm really passionate about this one. So water corresponds exactly to your psyche. And your mind actually rests in a pool of water, cerebrospinal fluid, and is either nourished by that either living or not so living substance. It's one molecule different from seawater. And if that ratio changes, if those ratios of electrolytes shift away from seawater, it affects your mental health acutely. So when I started to drink fresh, living water, not only did my communication become clear, but my emotions became more easeful, and stress started having a way of just sliding off my back. My thinking was clearer and less cluttered. It really transformed my way of being in the world in subtle but profound ways. And you know, it makes sense, right? Like, according to Jungian symbolism, which is the study of the patterns within the collective consciousness, water equates to your emotions and to your mental state. And the research linking hydration and mental health is staggering. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio. It's incredible. Now, this topic is really dear to my heart because countless people suffer unnecessarily just from a lack of understanding that your brain is 80% water, and your brain requires adequate hydration to function normally and excess hydration to function optimally. And B, the vast majority of the population is chronically dehydrated. Like on pandemic levels, we're all dehydrated. And C, get this, chemistry only makes up 20% of your brain function. The other 80% is electrical activity conducted by the water of your CSF. But the pharmaceutical industry only addresses the 20% chemical factor. Like, yes, serotonin balance is important, but oftentimes if you address hydration, neurochemistry will naturally balance itself out. If 80% of your brain function is based on the electrical conductivity of the water of your brain, why are we feeding so much money into this pharmaceutical industry that only treats the other 20%? There's an incredible neurologist and psychologist named Dr. Van Anrooy in Colorado, and she actually addresses hydration first in all of her clients. And she's seen that even in cases as severe as bipolar disorder, optimum hydration is at least as effective and sometimes more effective than pharmaceuticals. So there is a better way. And it's really not just the simple adage of just drinking 8 glasses of water, because hydration is more nuanced than that. And again, if you don't drink the right kind of water, or your body isn't optimized to absorb it well enough, then you're just going to pee it out anyway. But as bodies of water, each and every one of us, healing hydration is the most potent form of medicine that we can learn to practice. So yeah, again, if you or someone you love has ever suffered from stress, depression, anxiety, ADHD, dementia, chronic fatigue, any of these things, I really encourage you to study more about the link between hydration and mental and emotional health. I'm working on a book about this that should be available in the next few months, hopefully before the end of the year. We'll see. Okay, so given these capabilities of water, is it any wonder that water research has been censored throughout history? Is it any wonder that most people think that water is as boring as dust? Seriously, I tell people that I work, that I teach about water for a living, and they look at me like I just said that I teach about dust. It's inconceivable to most people. And I think that's really for a reason, because realizing its power would destabilize everything. It would empower every single person who is made of water. Understanding water empowers you as a body of water, living on a body of water. So it's really up to each and every one of us to spread this wisdom and to break the censorship and to change the world together. So now is our opportunity to play a higher role, to serve a higher purpose, and to be of service to the source of life itself. So real quickly, just to finish up, here's the most useful part of today's workshop. Without your pens and pencils again, boys and girls and others, we are going to talk about what each of us individually can do to raise the vibration of water on this planet. So what are our action steps moving forward from here? First thing, I would say read Viktor Schauberger, get to know his work. It can be kind of hard to plod through because it was written over a century ago in kind of technical terms and translated from Austrian, so it's dense. Sometimes you have to read each paragraph a couple times, but it's worth it. He actually discovered the blueprints and patterns of nature, and it's only through nature's wisdom that humanity will get ourselves out of this mire that colonial patriarchy and blind faith in technology have dug ourselves into. So please learn and spread that information if you can. Number 2 would be to support your water protectors. Be an activist, stand against fracking and pipelines, get engaged with local activist groups that attend anti-fracking hearings at your local city hall. You can join your local watershed association. You can attend meetings of your state's water conservation board. If you're in the United States, it's usually a division of the Department of Natural Resources. You can stay really up to date on pipeline politics. So North Dakota, the North Dakota Access Pipeline, it got a lot of press, right? But it was installed regardless. And there are currently 97 other areas in the US fighting similar pipelines, but there's no more media attention, so most people are completely unaware. But the destruction of water resources is a form of terrorism, and denying poor people access to water by privatizing water distribution is also terrorism. But there's this growing grassroots counterterrorism initiative of people all over the world fighting for their rights. This huge mass mobilization of water warriors. It's been said that the revolution won't be televised, and this is so true. The global water justice movement is huge, and it's growing, and it needs you to be a part of it, and it's not being televised. So we got to be proactive about this, right? I have a whole video and blog on my website with some specific things that you can do as an activist to really make a difference, but it matters now more than ever, because right now we are at the legal crux of a historic question. The question is whether water is a legally protected human right or not. Is it just a commodity that can be bought and sold by those who can afford it? Is it a commons like air or a commodity like Coca-Cola? There are some really powerful forces at the helm of the privatization movement that want to have the laws permanently changed to state that water is not a fundamental human right. Because we don't need gold or oil to survive, but we need water. And by the capitalist laws of supply and demand, that makes blue gold infinitely more valuable than black gold. And the most powerful and wealthy people in the world have realized this, and they're capitalizing on it. And we, right now, this generation, us, we will be the determining factor of what the whole future of human history will look like in terms of whether or not they have access to the source of life. I mean, even as it stands now, 1 in every 3 people doesn't have access to clean water. That's because as it stands now, there is a global apartheid between the global north. There's a water apartheid between the global north and the global south. Because as it stands right now, if you can afford water, then congratulations, you have the right to live. If you cannot afford water, then you have the right to die. That's why 80% of disease worldwide is caused by lack of access to clean drinking water, according to the World Health Organization. So we need to be very involved in this, as though our lives depend on it, because they do. So the next thing is to empower Indigenous rights. We need to protect Indigenous people and uncontacted tribes, because water theft happens all over the world to Indigenous people on a daily basis, and they don't get the press that they deserve. And most often it's these Indigenous communities that are suffering from the eminent domain and having their water sources poisoned, and they really need our voices to stand with them. And also the people who were fighting to protect water in North Dakota, they can still use our help. A lot of them still have legal fees to cover. There's a nonprofit called Lakota People's Law Project at lakotalaw.org, where you can support them, lakotalaw.org. So it's really heartbreaking. You know, Indigenous people are the original water protectors and stewards, and they carry wisdom and legends and understandings and relationships with nature that are legacies, and it's really up to all of humanity as brothers and sisters to honor that. So one of my favorite foundations to support Indigenous people is Survival International. Survival International. They do really good work. Okay, next, let's step off the soapbox for a minute, but maybe the easiest thing that you can do would just be to love your water. So it sounds really simple, but you know, water, like we talked about earlier in the presentation, water is primarily an effect of love itself. It's only because hydrogen and oxygen love each other through this electrostatic hydrogen bond that water is even possible. So water really responds to love, right? And once it experiences this love from us, it changes its function. It acts energetically to enhance more love in the world. Right? Water is a mirror. It always mirrors us back to ourselves. It reflects us back to ourselves, whatever we give to it. I'm sure everyone here has heard of Dr. Masaru Emoto, right? And the incredible work he did with water crystals in Japan. And he said that the following phrase is one of the best things you can say to water. You say, water, I love you, I thank you, and I respect you. And if we carry that true intention in our hearts whenever we interact with water, it makes a bigger difference than you might think. Okay, another more practical thing is to dig water retention ponds to prevent runoff. So we didn't get deep into the ecology of desertification today. You can find some stuff about that on my site, but basically this just means dig holes. There's been so much there's been so much deforestation that water just kind of runs off into the ocean now to become salt water, and it doesn't have much chance to seep into the ground and get into the aquifer and do the whole second part of the hydrological cycle that we talked about. And we can really help with that just by digging water retention ponds. So if you're a landowner or you want to go out on the BLM and do it, just dig big holes. It's simple, but it helps water to really seep in and have more time to penetrate the soil and get into the aquifer. In fact, you can get in touch with your local watershed association and volunteer with them. They may already have some initiatives like this in place. Another thing is to visit and protect your local springs. So a lot of springs have dried up. Again, deforestation and development, you know, areas are just paved over. But back in the day, it was a common practice for people to get their water from springs, and not even that long ago, like even 40 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for people to pay more than the price of gas to get water from bottles. Like even your grandparents probably got water from springs. This is a legacy, right? And it's up to us to really protect these places. There are still a lot. They're drying up more and more all the time, but I really foresee and I envision a world where we value these sacred places where water comes to the surface, and we protect them for future generations. I mean, tell your friends about it. Tell your friends where the springs are. Create some culture and some community around visiting springs together. It's like visiting church, right? You're literally going to the source of life. you can go to, and this is the most important resource. I will give you this whole talk. So definitely write this down. It's a website called findaspring.com. Most important tidbit of information. That and drink more water. That's it. If you take nothing else away from this whole thing, findaspring.com and just hydrate. The next thing that we can do is consider being a water carrier for your community. Consider going on pilgrimage to collect this vibrant, vital source of life and bring it back to your clan. So you can fill up a van with several 6-gallon carboys, even if you have to drive an hour away to do it. I mean, who doesn't drive an hour to go to the airport, right? But this is a sacred charge. You're healing up and blessing your whole community by doing that. And some of you are going to take on that practice, that service, and that is amazing. I honor you. You know, a lot of people also take on the practice of carrying blessed waters, or what the Celts called wished waters. And that's not water for drinking so much, it's just for prayer and ceremony. And you gather this water from sites around the world and you share and spread it and commingle it with other waters around the world. Everywhere you visit, you know, you share this water with other water carriers you meet. And it's a really fun and beautiful way to pray with the waters. So another practice is to sing with water. So this was one of the most common indigenous practices and beliefs throughout the world and throughout history, that it's the duty of women in particular, but really anyone can do it. But in most tribes, it was the duty of women, this sacred responsibility to sing to water, to sing about water, to sing with water. And a lot of the ancient indigenous water songs are on the verge of being lost, or, you know, countless of them have already been lost. So it's up to us to keep them alive and to create new ones, because the effects of sound vibration, and specifically the human voice, on the structure and function of water is really profound. And the ancients knew this. They had a deep, innate understanding of this. And it's one of my favorite ways of really cultivating deep communion with the essence of life. And personally, I believe that any meaningful change has to start with that primary relationship, whatever form that takes for you, singing or praying, or just pouring water, or just going to the spring, or just whatever it looks like for you. Any meaningful change is going to have to start with relationship, with that communion with water, right? It's a very personal thing. Okay. Another thing is to go just be proactive about it. Like, you can actually just go be a water rogue. You can bless up your water, vortex it, magnetize it, ormus it, deplete the deuterium, add extra hydrogen, just get it super high quality, supercharged, super water as possible, and then go to your municipal water supply, your reservoir, rivers, lakes, streams, and just put a little bit of that water that you made really high quality into the larger body of water, because we talked about that property of transference earlier, right? The larger body of water will respond to the higher quality crystalline water through transference. And you can actually have a pretty big impact in that way, even with just a small amount of water. And I know it seems like hocus pocus, but the science is there. And if your faith and your practice are there as well, you can really move mountains. So also invest in the companies really making a difference. Some of you might be philanthropists, and there are a lot of initiatives out there that are doing really good work. There are a lot that are just greenwashing or blue washing, right? They're still exploiting explosive technologies, or supporting privatization efforts, or investing in desalination plants. And 99 out of 100 desal plants are disgusting. They pump a liter of poison for every liter of water that they desalinate. So you really have to look into not only the enormous investment potential, but also, I mean, the world is desertifying right now, so it's an incredible place to put your money with high returns, right? But you really have to look into the actual efficacy or the actual ethics behind these companies and what they're really doing behind the greenwashing. So lots of amazing nonprofits out there too, fighting to give legal rights to bodies of water. We vote with our dollars, right? So we have to be proactive advocates for water, because she can't vote for herself. She can't support these companies herself. And we are bodies of water, right? It's not like we are protecting water. We are water protecting herself. So let's be more proactive about it. And the very last recommendation is hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. So if our bodies are smaller holographic projections of the Earth's larger whole, then our chronic and epidemic levels of dehydration are partially contributing to the Earth's desertification, and vice versa. So we need to hydrate more now than ever, not just for our sake, but on behalf of everyone, just to affirm a more hydrated world. They've traced nearly all disease back to dehydration at its root. And that's something we can really change. The work of Dr. Batman-Gelage and countless other doctors are really finding that dehydration is at the root of all aging and disease and illness. So when you're born, you're like 75 to 80% water, but by the time you're an elder, it's only 50%. And that's not because we're drinking less water, but our bodies lose the ability to absorb and retain it. Now, the body possesses many disguised thirst signals. So you might not feel thirsty, but that doesn't mean you're not dehydrated. A lot of the signs of severe long-term dehydration are mistakenly seen as symptoms of disease. So some of the early symptoms of dehydration: fatigue, anxiety, irritability, depression, cravings, cramps, headaches, mood swings, brain fog, trouble concentrating, smelly BO, stubborn weight gain, skin issues, and so many more. And if those are not addressed when you first start feeling them, if that hydration continues and becomes chronic, then the more advanced symptoms of dehydration eventually develop into heartburn, joint pain, back pain, migraines, fibromyalgia, constipation, colitis, ulcers, asthma, allergies, high cholesterol, autoimmune issues, and so many more. So please get hydrated. And if you want some tips on some good ways to get hydrated, I've got a free resource guide over on my website. It's a quick, free Quench Your Thirst PDF, simple overview of a few key hydration hacks that I recommend, just some basics to get you started. And then if you want to dive deeper and really learn the difference between bottled water and tap water and reverse osmosis and alkaline and spring water, etc., and how each one affects your body and your mind really differently, I just released this brand new e-course. It's only 10 to 20 minutes a day for 7 days, and it only costs as much as 1 bottle of water per day for 7 days, and then you'll just empower your hydration strategies for literally the rest of your life. So I know we all have really different levels of access to water, and we all do the best we can with what we have and where we're at, but we do need a strategy. We are post-Fukushima, post-nuclear fallout, mid-fracking. We need a strategy to develop our water sovereignty. So, you know, it's so empowering to be able to secure good, high-quality water for yourself and your family. So I hope you'll join us for that. And I just want to finish by saying that water is a solvent, right? It dissolves things. So when you have a problem and you want to solve it or dissolve it, we call that a solution. And when you solve or dissolve something into water, we also call that a solution. And I believe that water can be the solution to solving the world's problems. And I think we can all be a part of that solution. So thank you all so much for the honor of your time and your attention, and thank you for your presence. It's really my privilege to get to share all this with you, and I hope you'll continue learning and continue hydrating, and join us on our Bodies of Water Facebook group to continue the discussion, share your hydration strategies and insights, and we're going to open it up for 15 minutes of questions. Oh, where's my mouse? Oh yeah, if you want to take a quick screenshot of the references, I'm sorry this isn't clickable. But if there was anything in particular that you really wanted to follow up with, also this webinar or similar webinar is available on my site too that does have clickable references. So.
Okay, I think Isabel, that would be awesome. Can you put your video back?
Oh yeah, I'm working on it. Let's see.
Yes, she's
right,
back.
Hey Isabel, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
You mentioned that water goes, by the way, thank you so much. It's really fascinating. I really love this. You mentioned it takes 5 minutes for water to go into blood. So I kind of saw the pathways. It goes from the gut into the blood and then intracellular. But even some people have issues getting it from the gut into the bloodstream.
Yeah, totally. A lot of people have issues with that. And interestingly, your probiotic balance, the balance of your microbiome, has a lot to do with how much hydration can actually be absorbed into your gut. So Dr. Zach Bush has some good resources on this. If you suffer from leaky gut syndrome, which a lot of people do, it's really common, then you're probably not going to be absorbing water as well as you could. So probiotics and prebiotics are a great way to work with that. Another really important thing for making sure that you can absorb water more, not only into your macro membranes, like in the gut, but also your micro membranes, like the cell walls, is by making sure you have a diet really high in oils. So like the cell membranes are basically just lipid layers, right? It's like a bilayer of different kinds of lipids. So the higher quality fats you have in your diet, the more permeable those membranes are going to be to the osmotic flow of intracellular and extracellular water. And if you want to test how much water you're actually getting across into your intracellular fluid, there's a test called the phase angle test that I recommend if you think you might have chronic dehydration and like other strategies aren't necessarily working for you. But that's what I would look at first in terms of addressing gut issues. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
We have a question from Graham. What's the best temperature to store water?
So you want to keep it cool. You don't have to get super, super particular about it. You just don't want it to warm up. So like if you go and harvest spring water, for example, in these 5-gallon glass carboys, you can get neoprene sleeves to keep them darker and cooler and more insulated. And then just make sure to, if you can, keep it in your basement instead of like, up in the window of your kitchen, for example. It doesn't need to be freezing to store it well, but just ideally pretty cool.
Any more question, guys? Come on, don't be shy.
Oh, another reason why you want to keep it cool and out of sunlight is because if you're actually harvesting water from a spring, it has microorganisms in there. It's got microflora and microfauna, and all of these are natural probiotics as well. So nature has a way of making this whole well-rounded water that's also probiotic for us. But if you leave it in the sunshine, or you let it get warm, then those microfauna or those microflora are going to photosynthesize, and they'll actually create these blue-green algae blooms. So that's another reason why you want to keep it dark, store it dark.
So the body temperature is just too hot. Like if we have the gallon and we just leave it in the shade in the kitchen, it's not okay.
Well, it depends on how long you leave it there. I mean, it's not a black and white kind of thing. It's not like this water is either totally structured or totally unstructured. There's a spectrum, right? So the longer it stays stagnant and warm, the more gradually those bonds are going to start to separate. But eventually, after you've been drinking this water for a while, you'll develop a taste for it. So you'll kind of know just by the texture of how silky the water is, whether it's kind of lost some of its structure.
You talk about structuring the water. Is there an off-the-shelf machine that we can buy to do that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. So yeah, here are some of the tools that I like to use. So I'm a traveler. I like anything portable. You can get more permanent, constantly vortexing flow fountains. I've got some links to that on my site. You can find, you can even make vortexers at home pretty simply from parts at the hardware store. But there's a few things that I like. So I've got this, which generates a, let me see, it generates a little vortex in there.
Oh, fancy.
So there's also, this one is great for, super portable for like bringing to restaurants. It's an immersion blender thing. It's not doing very well right now because I need to replace the batteries, so it's going very slow. But
I do hot
leave it
chocolate.
in there for a while.
Hot chocolate with that.
You what?
I do hot chocolate with that.
Yeah, I mean technically it's actually a latte frother, and this thing is actually a protein mixer, but they make vortexes, so they work perfectly. And then also because of transference or epitaxy, I like to use a crystal water bottle. Now this will not necessarily give the water a very stable structure, but if the water is already structured, it'll help it maintain its integrity longer. And then also copper water bottles are great.
What do you think about magnets?
Magnets are awesome. Oh my gosh, magnetized water is incredible, especially dipolar magnetized water.
But that's a way to structure water as well, and there's all sorts of magnetic structuring devices. Yeah.
Totally. I have yet to find any that are good, like small portable devices. I kind of want to invent one. But especially because, so Theodor Schwenk proved that water, when it's in motion, is when it's most sensitive to its environment. So it's actually movement that opens up water as a sensory organ. So if you were to expose water to light or magnetism or sound frequency or something, ideally you want to do that when it's moving, right? So I have a friend, my friend Randy is a total water wizard. He, do I have one with me? Oh, not nearby, but he developed these little vortexing couplers that you can connect an empty water bottle to a full water bottle, and you vortex it, and then it has these dipolar magnets at specific intervals around it, so that it's actually being magnetized when it's at its smallest point in the vortex. And that's the most powerful moment to magnetize it, is at that super small moment in the vortex. You probably already know that, Mark.
So
There's heaps. I've just gone around the world and bought every magnetizing device I could find to look at my own structure. Yeah, and there's lots of, you can buy them really cheaply from China, like $5 US.
I want to see some of your toys.
What about, if you get water from the ground in Bali, Bali is being very volcanic, and if I just use a Nasava filter, would that be a structured water?
Yeah, well, if you're getting it from a spring, it's structured water for sure.
Just
and then
from the
because
ground,
there's so
not
much
from
paramagnetic.
Just from the well in the backyard.
Oh, I would recommend going to it. There's so many springs nearby. It's really worth the pilgrimage. It really is. But even from a well, I mean, it does have that paramagnetic volcanic influence. It's probably going to be certainly more structured than any other well water. But I mean, if you can get spring water and there's so many nearby, it's definitely worth it.
Okay, I think what would be useful for Bali, if you could put them all on a Google map, if you're aware of that would be super useful.
Yeah, so findaspring.com probably has a lot. I haven't checked for Bali yet.
Okay.
But also it's a user-supported database. So and there's a bunch around, even just in Ubud alone, that we can add to the site if they're not on there already.
Oh.
So well water is absolutely not, sorry to interrupt, well water is so absolutely not structured, or a little bit, or please.
Again, it's not black and white, it's a whole spectrum, and everyone's well is a little bit different because they're at different, drilled at different layers into the geology, right? So first thing to do would be to look at the deed to your property and find out how deeply the well is drilled. So there's a difference between a groundwater well and an artesian well. So if it's a dug well or a groundwater well, that's not going to be very structured water, and you're going to want to filter that a lot. If it's an artesian well, it goes all the way down into the bedrock. It depends on the geology of the area. It depends on like what kind of pipes you use. There are a lot of factors, but Viktor Schauberger described it as like the difference between mature water and immature water, right? The difference between ripe water and unripe water. So if you artificially pump water up from the earth before that moment of perfect ripeness and readiness, then it doesn't have the chance to undergo the same process. It's just like if you were to take a baby C-section at 5 months instead of through, the birth canal at 9 months. The spring is like a birth canal because on the way up, the water goes through this process where it's exposed to not only the radiant energies of different electromagnetic frequencies, but also the microflora and microfauna that you need in the water, and it's vortexed by that lunar gravity. It encounters all of the electrolytes in the soil to give it a balanced mineral profile, and while it's spiraling to the surface, a lot of those electrolytes are lifted into their ormus state that we talked about earlier. So it's definitely preferable to get spring water, but I'm not knocking on well water. If that at some point is all you have access to, it's probably in my top 5 favorite waters.
Well, there is nothing in Ubud. There is just one, and it's really badly located in that website that you mentioned. So, would you take on that mission for Bali?
Yeah.
All
I'd love
right.
to do that.
So I'll keep you accountable on that. You can, we have the emails of everyone. If you can
I want to go on spring tour.
update the
for sure.
website. If they have the website already, you're right. We don't have to reinvent it. But when it's updated, share it with everyone in the community so we know where to get our water in Bali.
For sure. And if any of you guys know where some springs are, reach out and let me know. And if you don't personally know, I promise you that if you have a housekeeper or a gardener or a Balinese neighbor, they definitely know where your closest spring is. Like,
Wow. Yeah, I think that's,
They're
I
always
know,
giving their
I know one. I know one. I can be responsible for one.
Isabel, what do you do with your spring water then? Do you filter it? What do you do?
I drink it.
Straight. Yeah.
Drink as much of it as I can, as soon as I can, while it's still all fresh and vital and vibrant. And then, yeah, I just keep it in, if I'm at home, I keep it in a glass container, dark glass with a neoprene sleeve to keep it cool and dark, but I don't filter it. I've been doing this practice for over 10 years, and I know hundreds of people who have been drinking from springs all over the world.
That's
If you,
right. Here also, I mean, all the local people that drink from springs and have no issues with it.
Yeah. Look,
if
I
you
think
know personally that you have a super, if you know you have a super sensitive gut and you want to ease into it because you're concerned about some contamination, you can get tests really easily. You can have the water tested. You can do a TDS reading. You can do an ORP reading. Those are all really simple things. But I would recommend just easing into it because, it's really good to have a more cultured microbiome from that kind of water.
Cool. One last question, anyone, before we close?
I was just going to say I've got an amazing ceramic water egg based on Schauberger's technology. So the water, because the ceramic is porous, it naturally evaporates and cools the water. So you've got a continually flowing vortex of the cold water flowing down and the hot water, the heat water rising up, and that keeps the water circulating. So it is possible to store water without it being stagnant, which is also, as Isabel was saying, movement is so important.
You mind going to your kitchen as we're closing so we can see it?
Yeah, I can show you. Can you see me?
The eggs literally create their own whole hydrological cycle just inside of the geometry of it.
Can you see that?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That's all my kombucha.
I think I have a link to that exact brand on my site too.
Yeah, actually, the guy who made it, he sold his company. They were made in Byron Bay.
Maybe a different one. It looks similar.
But they're awesome.
Can you show it again? I already see it.
What do you want? I'll walk around and show you.
Because we saw, yeah.
Can you see it? I can't see it because I can't see my own video. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we can see. It's an egg. We can see an egg.
Isabel, how long?
Actually, the Sumerians first discovered that. The Sumerians built these giant ceramic eggs and they buried them underground, and they were dug up, I don't know, at least hundreds of years later, and everything that was inside of them was still fresh.
One last question.
Yeah. Do you think it's okay if you collect spring water, like how long to store it before to leave it stagnant?
I mean, it just depends. Like, you can bring water back to life again. It's not like there's an expiration date on it. So, you can vortex it and add some hydrogen and deplete the deuterium and do all the things that you want to do to it, even if it's been stagnant for a while. It's hard to say because it depends on temperature, it depends on light exposure, it depends on the quality of the spring that you're getting your water from in the first place. So it's hard to give a specific answer to that. But again, you'll develop a mouthfeel for it. You'll just develop a taste for it.
Sure.
All right, guys. So if you're done, guys, if you copy all the links, I've put a lot of links as we were going. So go there. We have a little questionnaire that I'd love for you guys to take a few minutes to just give a bit of appreciation for Isabel so she can use your feedback and comments in her marketing and her communication. That would be very helpful. As you know, she has an online course, which, my personal mentor, Dr. Mark Cohen, just down there somewhere, did the course as endorsing. So if you're into it and want to support her, I've put the link.
Everyone needs to do the course. Everyone who drinks water, which is everyone alive, needs to do your course.
Yeah, so the link is there on the right. yeah, if you have questions, get in touch. Otherwise, sign the balipledge.org if you like Bali. So we also get that moving. And I see you all in the community on Thursday, 2 p.m. for the community meeting. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isabel. That was enlightening. I'm very happy that could work. Apologize for the hiccups at the beginning. I'll send both recordings. But yeah, it was fantastic at the end. So very happy for that. All right.
Thank you guys so much.
Last words for you, Isabel.
I'm just so grateful that all of you guys stuck through this whole presentation. I can't wait to hear your feedback or your questions or your insights. And yeah, just thank you so much for allowing me to share this with you guys.
Great. All right, guys. Have a beautiful day or evening or morning,
everybody.
Wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye, guys. I let you check out, so I know that you've copied all the links, and then I will stop the recording. Oh.
Wow, you guys were going off in the chat. I didn't even know. I missed all kinds of things.
Hey, I was a good assistant. I improved myself. You can see whatever you were saying, I was researching, copying the link. So you've got all the people you were mentioning.
That's badass. Thank you. And you do it all my presentations.
I was your bitch. I was your bitch for 2 hours. All right.
You love that.
Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
All right, I'm gonna hop off and get some food.
All right, guys. Bye, everyone.